Welcome back to the Un Holier Podcast. I'm your host, Jenny Smith. Today's episode is a powerful one and honestly a really tender conversation. I'm sitting down with Luke, who spent years as a worship leader in a mega non-denominational church. From the outside, his faith journey looked solid, confident, and even inspiring. But behind the scenes, he was quietly wrestling with questions, doubts, and the painful unraveling that so many people experience during deconstruction. In this episode, he opens up about what it was like to lose his faith framework he once stood on, the grief that came with it, and the unexpected place where he found healing through music and songwriting. What started as a way to process his own story has become a source of comfort for others who've left the church or are still in the middle of deconstructing. This conversation's not only honest and thoughtful, but it's deeply human. If you've ever felt alone in your questions, unsure of where you belong spiritually, or curious about what healing can look like on the other side of certainty, this episode is for you. So let's get started.
It's great to meet you, Jenny. Thanks a lot for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's been great getting to know you. You guys have no idea what we just went through. We could not get, I could not get Luke's microphone working on my end. And so he was muted on my end, but he could hear me and he could hear himself. But, I am just not tech savvy. And so we had to do some screen sharing and he walked me through the process and we figured it out, you guys. We did not have to reschedule today. So we were also saying this could be God punishing us for talking about, leaving the church, or it could be Satan. Who knows? You just never know, right?
Yep, that's right. Maybe we're actually in hell right now, and this is what it actually looks like.
I swear that could be true. Some days, I do feel that very deeply.
Yep, debugging Zoom. That is a special kind of hell.
Yes, it is. Anyways, it is so good to have you here on the Un Holier podcast. And I'm excited to get into this conversation today. And you and I kind of connected I saw one of your TikTok videos and your music is amazing. So we'll definitely dive into that as well.
Thank you.
'Cause I want everyone to go and listen to your music. It's incredible. And yeah, your videos are really cool and they draw you in. And so then it's like, oh my gosh, I want to know what happened to him. And so we connected on TikTok and here we are. So I'm excited to get into it. I would love for you to take the first couple of minutes and just kind of introduce yourself and just tell everyone listening who you are and maybe what cult or religion you came out of. And then I'm sure I'll have lots of questions after that.
Yeah, sounds great. So my name's Luke. My artist name is LJR. I'm a nostalgic alternative rock artist, and I take inspiration from Peter Gabriel, Coldplay, and really like Hillsong United. Like, although I don't actively advertise that, I'm kind of coming to terms with the fact that was a massive, massive influence for me as an ex-worship leader. Because I grew up in the church, and I spent, I don't even know how many thousands of hours there, as long as I can remember being alive, we were always going to church. And some of my earliest memories were at church with, little, Bible study things, right after like the adults have their service, we have like the kids kind of exit to go to their little classrooms and learn stuff. And ever since I was about 10, I started subbing as one of the drummers for the adult worship team, because the drummer for their big like Easter service, I think it was, or it's some big yearly celebration that they did in the summers. So I guess probably wasn't Easter. They needed a drummer because their drummer bailed for whatever reason. Maybe he was hungover. I don't know. So my dad asked me to sub because my dad was the worship pastor. And it went great. And from then on out, I just became one of the rotating drummers. And I was always like the guy that got called last minute because my dad would always be playing. And of course, he would just need, if the drummer, bailed, which often happened, then he would just have somebody in his back pocket, AKA me, to drag out of bed at 6 a.m. To go to church. And I really loved it. I found a lot of beauty and joy and meaning in it. And especially as I got more like hardcore committed, in like probably middle school time frame was when I really started to kind of buy into a lot of the, more evangelistic,
Mhm.
aspects of it and everything. And I was really getting a lot more passionate about like the worship side of things, from not just enjoying the music and playing the songs, which I enjoyed, but really thinking about the words and trying to connect with God,
Mhm.
as we're doing this whole worship thing. And then in high school, there's a big focus in our youth group of inviting all your friends and trying to, save the world, get them to believe the gospel and all that stuff. So, I was actively trying to do that. And I was Christian and homeschooled, but we were part of a homeschool group. So I'd invite people from that. And those were mostly Christians, but they were, some of them were like, not really that committed. They weren't the real Christians. And so you had to still get them. And a couple of people from my swim team and, my neighborhood and stuff like that. Or like my cousins, I was always trying to like find people that I could reach out to, and
Right.
also like try to really be the hands and feet of God. As you like, I really took it seriously when they would say, when you're trying to love people, what does that look like? Well, love the least of these. Well, who's that? That's the guy in the lunchroom that nobody wants to talk to, that
Mhm.
nobody's, friends with. And I made a point of always just finding those people and just spending time with them. So I was like, well, that's what I want to do. I think that's what it means to really be a good person. And it was all reinforced by the scripture and everything. And part of the reason that my parents homeschooled us was because they wanted to give us a really firm foundation for our faith, and they didn't want us to be, kind of polluted by the world type of thing, right? As a lot of parents, especially at that time, were homeschooling their kids with that goal of giving them a strong, foundation, so when they did eventually go out into the world, they wouldn't give in to the influences of the flesh and such.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of deep study at home, and my dad went to, Bible school. He got his master's in theology, and my mom was just as serious about all of that. And so they both were exceptional, like biblical scholars, basically. And so they taught us that from a very young age growing up, like, how do you do that? Like, one of the things that I've talked about a couple times is this idea of reconstruction, where, like, how do you study the Bible well? You don't just read it and see what the Spirit speaks to you. You try to understand it properly in context with what are all the other things that are going on in that time. And also, like, can you put together grammatically the structure? Like, if take a letter of Paul's, what is the whole message of the whole thing? How does it all fit together? He's not just rambling, right? He's got a structure. He's got something he's trying to say with subpoints and all this kind of stuff. Things fit together, and they do. And so we would like literally go through line by line, and we would kind of try to find like what's the topic sentence, like what's the kind of main thing it's about, and then he goes into that, and then you indent that, and it's like all the stuff about this thing, and then you'd find your next big point and kind of go like that. And obviously it was kind of cheating to go off of like the little titles that are put in, by religious scholars or whoever's making the particular version of that the Bible. And a lot of times those aren't really like the most accurate, or they don't tell the whole picture anyway.
Mhm.
So we took that really seriously. And I also, we studied a ton of apologetics, Lee Strobel, Case for Christ, Josh McDowell, Evidence That Demands a Verdict, the Case for Faith, all that kind of stuff. We were really hardcore into that. Same thing with like I Kissed Dating Goodbye, all that kind of stuff. Really hardcore with that. And most of my life, especially since I wasn't part of a public school, was church. Sunday morning, I'd wake up at 6, we'd leave at 6:15, and we'd get there by, well, I guess probably 6:30. And then we get there by 7, and we'd set up, practice a little bit for the 8:15 a.m. service. Because at the time we were still growing into the mega church that we became, that would end up being about 3,000 people, but we are very much overflowing our current service capacity. So we had an 8:15, we had a 9:45, and 11:15 service.
Wow.
So yeah, it was a ton. And we ended up adding like a young adult service on Sunday evenings too. So, and I would play for all three of those services, and then there'd be band practice for the youth group in the afternoon, and then there'd be the band practice for the young adult service that was that evening, and then there'd be the young adult service, and then there'd be like community hangout time after that. So it was really like a full day on Sundays. And then, Monday would be either skit team or band practice. Tuesday would be skit team or Bible study. Wednesday would be some sort of other thing. Thursday would be prayer night or worship night. Friday would be outreach night. Most of these nights, there was something going on that was really kind of gearing your whole mind toward saving the world. And so it's literally like my whole life. And I'm working really hard to make it, to take those messages to heart of, it's not just about saying or doing the right things is about really believing this. And what does that really look like? And it's a lot more than just, going to these events. It's like, does your life actually match the character of Jesus? Are you really using all your gifts to serve him, and to build the kingdom here on earth? We are really, really serious about that. And how does that apply to your own personal life? And so that would be, how does that apply to how well you're doing your school? Are you glorifying God in that right now? Or are you really just kind of being selfish and doing your own thing? Or like, are you taking your music seriously? Like for worship, a lot of people in the band did not really take learning their parts seriously. And so they didn't really even learn the songs, especially not the right parts. They just learned these chords that clearly were not the right voicings and stuff like that. Or the beat wouldn't be right, or they wouldn't learn the fills, or the energy wouldn't really be there, or whatever it was. And my whole family was really serious about learning the exact parts. Actually, my dad was not quite as good. We always kind of got on him for that. But we were really serious about learning the right parts, the right fills, all that kind of stuff. So anyway, that was like my whole upbringing was really focused on that. I ended up going to school for mechanical engineering because my parents wanted me to do something that made sense for things I liked. And I did like, science and math, and I was good at that. Didn't have something else I really wanted to do. Even though I was doing a lot of music, I didn't think that's what I wanted to do as my main thing. My older brother did, but really wasn't there. So once I finished once I finished my degree at UMBC, I went on to go for my PhD because I got a great scholarship, and I was following kind of all of these great opportunities, but I wasn't really in touch with who am I really. So I think in a lot of ways, my upbringing in my family and in church had disconnected me from true like self connection to being aware of like, who am I? What do I want? I had really taken it seriously to like empty myself of me and my desires and fill myself with the identity of Christ. And that meant that basically there was a huge lacking that was going on inside of me. And I think there's lots of ways to kind of psychoanalyze that and look at different emotional neglect and codependency and all that kind of stuff. And I've done a lot of studying of, trauma and how that manifests itself in the body and all that kind of stuff. And that's been really fascinating to see like what happened and have some articulation for that now in my life. But eventually I just realized I'm just not happy doing this, even though I was 4 years into the PhD program at College Park at the University of Maryland, working on robotics with this autonomous robotic bird that we built that would fly around and do aerobatics. And, it would do it all on its own. Like it would balance itself in the air and navigate using GPS and do like flips and dives all by itself. Objectively cool project. My mental state was just going down the toilet. So eventually I decided to quit and try to find my way. And that was like a big, who knows what this is going to be. But I knew that the things that made me come alive were creating art, building meaningful relationships, and empowering people. And so whatever I did personally and professionally, I wanted to be in one of those areas. And really like, I just needed everything to kind of fit within that because I was just tired of feeling like I was wasting my life. Yeah, then I started doing music because that was my main kind of art form. Started releasing a lot of covers on YouTube, stuff similar to Tyler Ward or Boyce Avenue or Sam Tsai, people like that like really crushed it with these covers and were getting like millions of subscribers. And then I started to make my own videos because, you got to have cool videos, and they all had cool videos. So eventually I learned how to do that well, and people asked me to start making videos for them. And then that turned into a little video production company for artists, where now that's what I do. That brings in all the revenue I need to make my life work and to make my music stuff work. And so now I'm kind of balancing running that small one-man company with really getting my music out there. And it's been really cool. It's been interesting to kind of find, to find there's different aspects of the healing process. And over the last years, I feel like I've connected with a lot more of the grief, as all the results of the therapy have finally allowed me to kind of reconnect with my body in a much more visceral way. And so I've noticed that coming up a lot more. It'll be things sometimes as simple as like, there's a really sad scene in Ted Lasso and I'm crying. And my wife is over there like, are you crying?
Yeah.
I'm like, yes, I am.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's a little bit of that. And then, so right now I just released my debut album called When the Sky Began to Fall. And it's about my deconstruction. And it's also about codependent relationships. And there's actually a lot of like overlap there in like your relationship with God, typically. and your and codependent relationships, especially like more, toxic ones or ones that are emotionally neglectful or abusive. So yeah, so putting that out into the world, I just released that in June. It's taken me a long time to finally finish it. These are songs that I've written over the past, 10 or so years. Actually, some of them even longer, some of them, 15 years ago, which is just crazy to kind of have all that out there. And so, yeah, now I'm just making a lot of TikToks about it and trying to connect with people, help them know that they're not alone, and try to help them really feel seen. And I'm trying to build a community as well it's centered on the music that gives people kind of something to connect around and let people know about releases and behind the scenes content. But also as a place to try to give more community to people that share in this journey. I feel like it's a very niche thing to be like an ex worship leader and have like leaving that. So I've had many people share the experience of like they don't know how to reconnect with music at all, and that was me for a long time. Like it was really hard after I left to feel like I was truly connecting in the way that now I feel like I'm starting to really find those connections. So yeah, that might have been a little bit longer than a couple minutes, but that's kind of the general thing.
I was just going to say, I have so many questions, and I'm like, where do I start? Okay, so you said one of the things that you had mentioned was that just trying to find like who you were, like find your own identity. And you are absolutely correct in saying we're taught like our identities in Christ. Like we have to deny ourselves, right? That's what the Bible tells us. We have to deny ourselves and we have to, you know, become whatever Christ wants us to become. Well, again, when you leave the church, you're like, what? I was telling
Yeah.
somebody the other day, it's like when I left, it was like, I don't even know what my favorite color is. It's as simple as that. Like even just down to something as simple as that. I was always told what to believe in, what to think, and how to dress, and what I was allowed to listen to, and what was wrong, and what was right. And so you're trying to find all these things at the same time. You really are kind of grieving your community that you had. You
Yeah.
you leave the church, and that's like everything you've ever known. And so I don't know if you experience this, but when I left the church, my dad was a pastor. And so that was a very big decision to leave the church altogether. I also went through a very public divorce because we were both in
Mm,
the religious cult that we were in. And so it was very overwhelming. And I thought to myself, well, these are my friends. They're gonna stand by me. They know that I wasn't in the wrong and all of that. But I got out of church and he stayed in. And so I was shunned. I was like, I
yeah.
didn't hear from my friends. I didn't get the support. I didn't get the encouragement. I didn't get the shoulder to cry on. I was by
Wow.
myself. And so it really is a big step for somebody to say, enough is enough. I'm not going to do this anymore. I'm leaving this community that I've known and I'm going to just jump into the ocean by myself without a life jacket. And
Yeah.
that's kind of what it feels like. And so I kind of feel that from some of your music. Like that's sort of what it feels like, right? Or like you're jumping out of an airplane with no pack on and you're just like, okay, here I go. Like I'm just jumping out there.
Yeah.
But there's so many rewards on the other side if you can get through the hard part. And I love how you said, deconstruction, reconstruction, right? So there is the deconstruction phase where you're trying to figure out maybe what I was taught isn't completely true. Maybe there's a lot more to life than what I was taught. Maybe people in the world aren't bad and they're not all out to get me and there are good people that aren't calling themselves Christian and oh my gosh, an atheist isn't a Satanist. You know, like this is all the things we were taught. Like if you're an atheist, you're probably a Satanist. If you're, and you're given all these like misconceptions about people, and then you find out that it's not necessarily true, and you're like, what? And then you start to say like, what else isn't true? And you're starting to peel back these layers. And I think it's interesting that you said you sort of went through this like grieving process, and that's something I went through. I know I can totally relate to that as well. But I always ask people when they leave the church or they decide like I don't believe how I was raised. I maybe don't even believe in God anymore, or I'm questioning like the very core of everything I was ever taught. What was like the pinnacle for that decision? Was there typically people say, well, it's many different things over time, but like what was that one like straw that broke the camel's back, if you even can remember or recall, that was like, I'm done with this, like I'm out.
Yeah.
Did you have a moment like that?
Yeah, I did. And actually, some of the stuff you said before that, I wanted to kind of touch on as well, because I think those are both really, there's so many good things that you said there that I think are so deeply true. When you leave, you are very much jumping out of this airplane, and you don't know whether there's going to be concrete, if it's going to be water, or if anything's going to slow your fall. I mean, water from high enough up is concrete. So like there's a whole journey that you have to be willing to go on, which is ironically like it's really like probably the most stepping out in faith you've ever done is leaving.
Right.
Which
That's
that
such a
is
good.
there's this strange parallel where there's almost like a foundational truth that's in the Bible, in the way that my journey was leaving felt like what it was supposed to be like coming into faith, right? It was the idea of like I once was lost and now I'm found, or even some of the ideas of like I like in Amazing Grace you sing about like I used to be a wretch. It saved a wretch like me, and I think of like the before and the after, and there is this transformational process that I went through that kind of carries a lot of the same. It's almost like, oh, I got born again. I like see the light somehow. Now I have a pathway to try to become like a better person. And you're kind of also like totally lost at the beginning for how do you really practically do that. And inside of Christianity, there's a lot more structure to kind of guide you through that process. And also the moment of entering into the religion is much more ceremonious, shall we say, because it's typically in a big moment of worship or an altar call or something like that. And it's this big transformational moment that's supported by your entire community. You're welcomed into this whole family. You feel this very visceral sense of, I understand now, and things are going to be different from this point going forward. And you feel like you're plugged into the story of the universe. And
Mhm.
that's not at all what it's like when you leave, even though it is like this parallel sort of journey of being like born again, and finding your way towards truth. And it's really hard to lose your whole identity when you've programmed it all into that. I think it's almost easier for people who grew up without church to have a healthier relationship with it, because you at least have a semblance of what does it mean to like own your own personhood, and what does that look like to feel a sense of like trust of your intuition. I mean, there's basic things going on in your brain when you think about like, well, what do I want to do? It could be as simple as like, today I want to play Minecraft, or today I want to play music, or I want to go on a hike, or I want to work out, or I want to ask this girl out on a date, or whatever it is, right? There's so many different things. And if you spent your whole life from the time you're really young trying to deny all of those impulses
Mhm.
and simply align everything with what the gospel, or what the particular version of the gospel is that your church is teaching you, you really have not built up your intuition, and definitely no trust in that intuition. And you also typically have not built a real sense of empowerment either,
Mhm.
where you A, have power, and B, are willing to use that to protect yourself. And you're taught to submit to the authorities. And so in your community group, and now you're supposed to, and when you leave, you got to find something new to believe, some new sort of structure, some new process by which you're going to bring in new information, let old information go, and iterate on the process itself to make it better so you can continue to seek truth. And who's supposed to be in charge of that process? Well, it's you, right? But who are you to have any say over whether or not it's a good process, because you've been taught not to trust yourself for a really
Mhm.
long time.
Right.
And to not try to amass any sort of like power. The heart is deceitful above all things, who can trust it, right? Like,
Mhm.
or this idea of, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. It's like I am nothing, but with God I am everything. And so when you lose that, you lose all the access to that power and motion, and so you have to like rebuild all that on your own, and it's really really difficult to do that. And I think that's something that is interesting to kind of explore, like what are good ways to kind of reconnect with that, and just to kind of share some that have been most helpful for me in the hopes that they'll be helpful for other people. A lot of it is just trying to pay attention to what is that little tiny voice that's, it's almost like listening to the Holy Spirit, except it's like, what is the thing that I want to do? What is the affect happening in my brain that says, you know what I would like? I like this coin over here. Like I like the design of this thing. I just love the shape of it and the way that it's the way that all these little things are in it, right? Something like that. Or I like coffee and I want to go get a coffee, and like paying attention to those things. Or I like music. And instead of like shutting it down immediately, which can oftentimes be your kind of immediate response, is to like lean into that. And I think it's especially easy to reconnect with it's none of this is easy, but it's easier to connect with things that you used to do as a kid if you have memories of those things before religion was like introduced. So for me, that could be like Nerf guns or Legos or like art or painting or music. Music was thankfully introduced to me way before church. So that's something I think is really interesting. And I think you hit on a really great point there when it comes to like that is one of the biggest fundamental challenges for people, because you are grieving this massive loss of everything that makes you who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually, as you go through your story, I think one of the markers of being able to know that you're healing is to be able to kind of tell a cohesive story where it's not just saying that everything that happened to me as a kid in church or all this stuff was bad. It's like you find a way to kind of integrate this story where you recognize all the pain and you condemn the things that were wrong, absolutely, but also finding ways to pull out the good in that so that you're not just throwing away this whole part of your life and this whole part of your story. Because a lot of what identity is story. And if you're just trashing that whole thing and saying, I can't connect with it, I can't value it, or it's none of that wasn't me, it's like you're really rejecting a huge part of yourself. And
Mm-hmm.
so finding a way to healing, I think, includes finding a way to integrate that into your story in a way that's healthy and that isn't just rejecting all of it, but it's like letting yourself process through all the pain and all the grief and all the anger of that, such that you can like, move forward
Mm-hmm.
as well. And then you start to write the rest of your story, right? You start to gain real power of your life. You trust your own intuition. You reconnect with what you want to do. And in the weirdest way, I feel like that life, when you really do that, like there are weird parallels to even verses in scripture, which are like so strange to me. But like as I grow and as I try to find my way, like I'm still trying to exhibit the fruits of the spirit, like that's still who I want to be. There's still ways in which I want to transform my life to grow, to be better.
Right.
To do that, I have to recognize like I'm not perfect. I'm not what I yet want to be. And if I wanted to extrapolate that out like crazy, I could say that like there's a perfect version of me I want to be like, and I want to transform into that slowly, right?
Mm-hmm.
And make choices like that. And that kind of sounds like the gospel, right?
Right.
But like where's the line between healthy and awful? Well, first I think there's the literal problem, right? Where it's like I don't think it's literally true that Jesus is real. I definitely don't believe in the blood atonement. And half the time, and the big challenge that I think that people have, one of the big challenges that I'll speak for me, that one of the big challenges with that idea of the gospel is that it typically brings shame with it. And
Mm-hmm.
supposedly shame was supposed to die with Jesus. And it was a whole thing, right? Like, but there's that for me, that's a way that I've been able to integrate some of my past story with who I'm becoming now.
Mm-hmm.
It's like I can see there's like a deep mythological truth that's there that I think transcends Christianity. It's probably been in plenty of other books and sacred stories. And I can carry that with me as I go, forward. And that's
Mm-hmm.
been really cool. It's been for me actually sometimes will get pretty emotional when I think about that, because I'm not just trashing that whole previous part of my life and throwing it all away. I can like find things that I can deeply value and kind of just it's almost like I'm continuing on that narrow path, that like it does have a lot of verses where it says few will be saved. What does it mean to like actually find the truth, right? So I don't know. I'm not trying to say that I know the truth or whatever. I just find these things to be to be really helpful. So in that process of like reclaiming one's own identity and finding oneself.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so those are some of the things I've found to be helpful. When you asked about the idea of what was the kind of the straw that broke the camel's back for me, there is a particular story that comes to my mind where, I mean, it was definitely a lot of different things kind of stacking up over time, where my visceral experience with God through worship and other things was really decreasing. My ability to feel like I was really connecting with some sort of deity, excuse me, or other entity was just really starting to fade heavily. And I figured, well, David went through this too, like we're not always going to feel like we're super connected to God all the time. And that's okay. Sometimes you feel like you're walking alone for years and my God, why have you forsaken me? Like these are normal things in this experience. And I held on to apologetics throughout that time of like, at least the historicity of the New Testament is like super solid. So I don't have to trust in my own experience. I can just believe based on the clear facts of the matter. And eventually I started to realize like, my experience does really actually matter. And if those facts were true, that would have implications as to what my current experience would be. And I tried to push a lot of these doubts away. And but then like in my mid 20s, around 24, I was seeing this girl and I thought we were going to get married and we ended up breaking up. And my family had a lot of issues that had just really kind of come to like that explosive point of it's actually really a big problem, and like everybody's making different choices that are like I feel like our family was falling apart. And I was in the PhD program at Maryland, and for engineering and anything like that is like really rough on your mental health, and it adds a massive amount of pressure. And it was just really difficult. And so there was kind of this perfect storm situation where, combined with all the doubts in my faith, everything was sort of falling apart. And so I was really reaching out to God during this time to ask for some real clarity, because I wanted to have something I knew I could hold on to. And I was also trying to think like, well, what would that look like? What would I accept? Like, I want to know, if God makes a sign, would I accept the sign? I don't want to be that person like, oh, well, God was there and you missed it. So I was like, well, I would need to know that it's real. And what would give me that? And I had this thought where like, I guess like if somebody got healed in front of me, that would do it. I thought that's way too far-fetched. Probably shouldn't even really ask for that. But I was spending a lot more time in personal prayer, and I was doing this like at Maryland at the campus.
Mm-hmm.
And one time I was reading my Bible and my intern like walks by me, and I had this urge to like put it away because I didn't want it to be seen as like reading the Bible and all that kind of stuff. And then the verse came to me of, if you're ashamed of me before your fellow man, I'll be ashamed of you before my Father.
Mm.
And so I was like, well, I really need to step out in faith here. Like, this is not, so I did. I didn't close it. He walked by, didn't say anything, went to the bathroom, it was right there, and then came out. And then he immediately asked me about it. And I was
Wow.
like, oh, this is weird. Okay, well, let me just follow through. And he was like, oh, is that a Bible? And I was like, yeah. It's like, oh, are you a Christian? I was like, yeah. Do you have a preacher that we could go to? Because I actually need prayer for healing. And I was like, well, that's really weird. Um,
Mm-hmm.
I do. I was feeling very nervous about this because, my church is not the type that like prays for healing. We don't do that. Like I'd heard of this, but we don't do that, right?
Yeah.
And I was like, okay, I'm just going to step out in faith. And so we drove to my pastor's house, and I was the worship leader for the young adult ministry at the time. And so I had, direct access. I could call him, we could set it up and everything. And so we did. And then we prayed for him, told him the situation, and we prayed for my intern. But he definitely prayed the sort of half-assed prayer of, God, like, we pray that, you heal him, but we also know that you have infinite ways and your understanding is higher than our understanding. And so, we
Sure.
just really want whatever your will is to be done here for the maximum glory of your kingdom, type of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Real cop-out prayer, when you don't believe that somebody's going to get healed and you probably think that's an unrealistic ask.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah.
I can
Good
also
point.
understand pastors taking that approach. And then I thought it was over. But 2 days later, I ended up going to a group. Just randomly, I got invited to some group of people that were all getting together. It was like a Christian, youth hang thing of like young adults. And I meet 4 people there who would go around on campus healing people on a local campus that I knew. And they said that, yeah, these people that they would lay their hands on and pray for to be healed, they needed surgery before, and then they didn't need surgery after. It was happening like a lot. They were doing it regularly as a way to, reach people for the kingdom. And I thought to myself, this is crazy. Like, really, is this really happening? And it was really feeling like all those coincidences were finally lining up for me in the way that I had heard that they happened for other people, and it was just too much to not be God. And I was like, oh my God, it's really happening.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I told them the situation where with my intern, they're like, oh, this is incredible. It's amazing how God works. And they're like, I was like, I want to take you guys to him. And you're like, oh, we can impart the gift of healing to you, and then you can heal him. And I was like, it's amazing how God works. And they're like, I was like, I want to take you guys to him. And you're like, oh, we can impart the gift of healing to you, and then you can heal him. And I was like,
Oh,
oh,
wow.
that's maybe a little much. I
Yeah.
think let's have you guys do it. And maybe that's where I lacked faith, Jenny, and that's why it
Okay.
ultimately, didn't end up working. But we can always blame me, for I think I had the faith the size of a mustard seed at least, because that is really small.
Yeah, that is small.
But I doubted in my if you doubt, you're like a wave tossed by the wind, right? So
Right. Yeah.
anyway, they actually lay their hands on me and they impart the gift of healing to me. And then I'm like, hey, let's just to be safe, let's like all pray for him. So I bring my intern, we all pray for him. And in my mind, I'm like, praying as hard as I can. And I'm also having this thought of like, if this doesn't work, like I'm going to need to do something different. Like something in me is going to break. I'm going to need to take a different approach to this. And, I was trying to push that doubt all the way out of my head for the same reason, as like we talked about before, but when he asked God, you must believe without doubt. Otherwise, because he who doubts is like a wave tossed by the wind, and you're not going to get anything in that situation. So anyway, trying to push all that out, but ultimately, when we kind of finished praying very impassionately, and after 20, 30 minutes or so of doing this, rotating who's praying, for him, all laying physical hands on him and everything, he like kind of gets up, and for a second, I'm like, oh my God, he's healed, maybe. And then he had it was almost like a Tourette's thing or something. Like he kind of had this like lack of body control. It would like kind of,
Oh, okay.
I don't know exactly what it was. He didn't know what it was either.
Hmm.
Apparently the doctor didn't know. And
Hmm.
yeah, then he did that right then. And so it was really obvious like he wasn't healed.
Yeah.
So in that moment, I was like, okay, I can't keep trying to force this to try to work. And so then I made the switch of, instead of thinking of God is truth, it was like, okay, I'm going to pursue truth. And if that ends up being God, then cool. But also maybe God is not really truth, at
Mm-hmm.
least not this version of God. And so that kind of was really the straw that broke the camel's back of like, okay, now I'm really going to reevaluate everything, because I'm not going to continue to try to force this to make sense when it clearly is not actually matching reality. And if this was God, it was some cruel joke on
Mm-hmm.
like, I was really trying to give everything I could. Could I have somehow given more or done better? Maybe. Sure. I'll even grant that like maybe I probably could have acted more in faith in some way, but to be so desperate in those moments, and to have God not be willing to at least do, something. I mean, not even like a little voice in my head after that was like encouraging me to keep going, or there was literally like nothing. And I'm not saying this as somebody that's had like the worst experience, with church. I think plenty of people have had far worse and more painful experiences where specific people have hurt them a lot more. I mean, I had, my own share of things that happened like that, but it's just not to the scale of what has happened to a lot of other people. For me, it's just over time, it just wasn't true anymore. And I had to really face that and be honest about that and try to find my way through.
Mm-hmm. So your deconstruction journey really started while you were still in the church.
Yeah.
You're still going up there on Sundays and singing and being in the praise and worship band, and you're doing the thing, and you're you're putting on that persona, right? That you were taught this is how you're supposed to be, right? And then in the meantime, you're questioning. You're like, wait a minute. Maybe this isn't everything that I thought it was. Maybe this isn't totally real. And that's happening in real time as you're in church, as you're like a worship leader.
Yeah. I mean, I was trying to push those thoughts out of my head, and thankfully there was some level of engagement by my church on these types of things, where it wasn't just like shutting down everything that you like. If you had a question, they tried to have resources for that, but there's always like an answer for everything. And so they would
Sure.
encourage you to like, yeah, seek truth, and like, definitely like don't just deny your doubts, like bring them to God, right? And so I was trying to kind of do both of those things, and so I didn't see it as like massively conflicting at the time, that I had questions and that I was struggling, and that I could make a statement of faith at the same time and try to lead other people into a place of connection, with God, by fulfilling my responsibility, at that time. But yeah, so I think this is a very common thing that happens for a lot of people in this position, is they start to experience their own doubts and questions. And there is this gray area where it's not that they don't believe at all, but it's also that they very much, it's not that they yeah, it's not that they don't believe at all, but they also very much don't believe. And there's like, you're kind of like, am I Thomas right now? I'm just looking for a sign. Which archetypal figure can I kind of connect myself with in those stories? And you're trying to find your way. And
Hmm.
there's, for a lot of people, I wasn't one of these people, because I wasn't, hired. We didn't believe in paying people for worship music at our church. It was the evangelical, non-denominational church, which is very common. Very few people get paid at those, except for
Hmm.
like maybe one or two worship leaders, mainly the one worship leader, and then like the worship pastor, and
Yeah.
then maybe like one assistant person, who takes
Mhm.
on some admin or whatever. So, but I think it's a very common thing when your livelihood is tied to that. You have to go a lot longer, because it's a way bigger sense of loss, especially when you have a family, especially when
Mhm.
you've dedicated your whole life and your schooling. Like, what if you've gone to seminary for this? Your whole education, has been that, and then you
Mhm.
fall away, and nobody's going to want to hire you with a degree in theology.
Oh yeah, yeah. No, I get that. I went to Bible college. What you just said resonated because when I went to Bible college, I went for youth counseling. And so then between my junior and senior year, I was working as an intern for my dad's youth group. There was no youth pastor at the time. There was some people who volunteered to work in the youth department. So I was helping out with that to get college credits. And then my first husband, who I married through the church, he became the youth pastor. So that was like my whole identity. It was like, okay, well, yeah, I went to college for this at Bible college, granted. Went to college for this. This was my role. This is, everything that I was put in a box to do. So I was fitting that mold. And then when I left and got divorced, it was like, okay, now I got to get a job in the real world. My resume says, this Bible college on it, and everyone's looking at me like, what is this? Like, I don't even know what this place is. And then you
Yeah,
have to
yeah,
like explain to your potential boss your whole story basically. It's like, oh my gosh, I can't escape
yeah.
this.
And you're like hoping they don't see you as like some weirdo, like crazy
Yes.
person, that like, why would
Yeah.
you ever do that?
Yeah.
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 And have you
You're like,
really changed, or
yeah, you're like, I'm out now. I'm out. I'm like, I am not that person anymore. I promise.
Yep,
I'm not gonna try and convert all y'all. I'm just saying.
yep, totally.
But yeah, it was weird and it was honestly embarrassing because it was like, wow, I do not have a normal education. And honestly,
Yeah,
the college I went to wasn't even accredited. So I might
yeah,
as well not even have it on my resume because it doesn't amount to even the paper that it's printed on.
yeah,
But if you are, in full-time ministry and you're working in the church and that is your occupation, then hey, good for you. And that's
yeah,
they look, it looks good for that. But if you're trying to get like a normal job that actually pays a decent wage, then yeah, probably not great. So
yeah,
that was a little bit of a struggle for me. But you are so right though. Like it really was like my entire identity. And I was raised in the church like from birth all the way up till I was 27 years old until I divorced. And so it was really hard to figure out like what do I believe about this or even the music. Like I wasn't allowed to listen to secular music. So when I got out and was starting to get exposed to regular music, it was like, wow, I really like this. Oh man, I really like that. Oh, I never thought I'd like rap, or I'd never thought I'd like some heavy metal groups. And I just
Yeah,
like
yeah,
all genres, but I was never exposed to any of that, right? You just don't know. And it was kind of a crazy, I guess it was like I just exposed myself to so much at one time, and it really opened my eyes to a lot. But at the same
yeah,
time, I was making some really poor decisions because I was in this tight little echo chamber community group in my church. And so I wasn't exposed to the real world, as they say. Like, there was no like street smarts, there was no like any real social interaction with anyone other than church people. So there were even just things that I would say, like, I never swore. So me saying like darn or heck or whatever, people are like, who are
yeah.
you? What are you, from the 1950s? It's like, you know?
Heck no.
Yeah. It's like you are a dork. But
Gosh darn you.
yeah, it's like I had so much to learn, but I love that you said, okay, when you were saying about don't like just forget about your whole story, because even if something happened to you in the church, like you can still, that can still be part of your story, and you can still pull parts, positive parts out of that. I totally agree with you, but I'm thinking to myself, I've talked to a lot of people who have been severely abused by their church.
Yeah,
And they might be listening and saying, screw that. Like, there is nothing good I can take out of that experience. And I say, there actually is. And I tell people this all the time when I talk about my story and the abuse that I endured for 5.5 years in my first marriage. And it took me a really long time to be able to talk about that publicly and to really dive into it. And so I was able to do that a year ago on another podcast. And then I came to the conclusion that yes, all of this bad stuff happened to me. And honestly, what led me to that point in my life was I had done everything by the book, right? I had obeyed my parents. I had gone to Christian school. I had never even kissed a boy until my college sweetheart when I was 19. I was a virgin when I got married at the wedding altar. All of these things, I did everything I was supposed to do. And then it landed me in an abusive marriage.
yeah,
And I was really angry at God because I'm like, screw you, dude. Like, this is this. I did everything I was supposed to do my whole life. Even if I
yeah,
had urges to do something different, I still denied myself and I still didn't do those things. And this is what I get for
yeah,
obeying. Like, to heck with all of this. And
yeah,
so I was at that point, and then leaving and losing my entire like identity, I thought, my community, some of my family members. It just was very jarring for me. And it wasn't until really last year when I finally was able to come forward with my story, I had this epiphany, like, you can't look at it all as a negative, because that happened for a reason. Not that it was like a good thing that happened to you, but the only way I found for me to win over my abuser is to use what he did to me to help other people who are going through similar situations, and to give them guidance and to say, like, hey, I know I have resources, because I had to figure out the hard way what to do, how to get out, what people to contact, and I'm able to now help other people get through those same similar situations. And so maybe you can't find a positive, if you're listening to this, of your church experience. Spin it to where you're able to help people who are in similar situations, that you're able to help them get out of that and be there for them in their deconstruction journey and help them through their healing, give them resources that maybe helped you get through that. And I think that your music is really doing that for people. So I'd love to get into that. If you're okay
Yeah.
with that. Okay.
I'd
So
love to. If you don't mind, I'd love to say a little bit about what you just said there, because I
yeah,
think,
yeah, yeah, go ahead.
yeah, I think you hit on some really, and I really appreciate your kind words that my music is helping people in that way, because that's like that's the most meaningful thing to me, outside of like being there for my family, is I want to be able to really help people
Mm-hmm.
process through and find their way
Mm-hmm.
in a way that's practical and really serve people. I mean, ironically, I feel like in some ways it's like, well, I'm still trying to build the same thing I was trying to build when I was a Christian. It's just not in the religious structure or in the God, structure, but I still believe in the idea of, serving other people, but doing that in like a healthy way, not like a sacrifice yourself beyond all, reason, and like completely betray and ignore all of your own needs,
Mm-hmm.
responsibilities, type of way. But and again, and that's not actually the most helpful thing to help other people anyway. One of the most helpful things you can do is to become the best version of yourself, so that your immediate community believes that life change is really possible, and that makes them then feel empowered to change, because they're like, oh, if Luke can do it, like I could do it.
Mm-hmm.
But I think there's a couple things that are important. When I do think what you said is really true, that there are ways in which, when you go through something that is truly awful, you oftentimes come out on the other side of it where you are able to help other people and have experiences that make it difficult for you to look back and say, I wish that this didn't happen. Some people, I mean, this is different for everybody, right? And it depends on where you are in your journey. And also, I think very much like what happened to you. I think there's a couple of things that are important. The first is that I think, we can share our experiences for like, here's how I was able to find value out of what happened to me. But I do try to stay away from like telling other people what, what they can do or what they should do or how they should view their experience,
Mm-hmm.
especially in the religious side of things, because a lot of the time, part of the challenge is that lack of power, or the requirement to sort of submit to an authority that's telling them like how to view things.
Mm-hmm.
So a huge part of that healing journey is to trust yourself. And so it's one of the messages that can often happen when, you or I were to say something like this, like, oh, like essentially it's like all things work for the good of those who love him, right? Be grateful for
Right.
this terrible thing. It's like one of the messages that they can get is that that thing that happened was good somehow, and that like they don't have the ability to say, it's like their interpretation or their viewpoint of it is somehow being dismissed or is invalid. And I think that can hit on the feeling of the damage of like an authority figure being dismissive of their own personal experience. And so there's a big like swing that I think people need to do in their healing towards like really kind of over trusting their own self, to honestly, it gets to a point where it's like you end up swinging back, because eventually you recognize like, I'm not the be all end all. It's not just my intuition. It's not just what I'm feeling. I need to balance that. But to heal, you absolutely have to make that swing. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's important, is like when people are in that journey, I don't want to tell people like how they should view their experience, right? It's they're kind of on their journey. I try to share more so like, for me, this is what I found to be helpful, is that there is a way to integrate that story in a way that didn't feel like a self-betrayal. I didn't feel like I was saying that therefore like everything was good about it. And I definitely don't feel like the ways in which I was, betrayed by God, or people let me down, or people hurt me, that those things were innately good. But oftentimes it's hard to kind of like get that message through, because I think you have to use like so many more words to kind of specify that.
Mm-hmm.
um, because you've got a beautiful story, right? That like you went through this awful situation after dedicating everything and like really following through, being faithful to the Lord and everything, to make sure that you were doing things the right way, and then blam, you get hit with this like horribly abusive marriage. This promise from God is clearly like being denied, and like he clearly didn't follow through on his end of the deal when you followed through on yours. And so, and you're able to look at that and say, after going through that, now I can help other people that have gone through that same thing. And
Mm-hmm.
sometimes that feels to people like it's almost like you're sanctioning, which you're not doing, but it feels like you're
Right.
sanctioning what happened. That there, because I can use it for good, therefore it was a good thing that happened. It's
Right.
more,
That's not, yeah.
yeah, I think this is like that idea of redemption that's actually really powerful. Is like before when that experience, and you said this, I think very specifically, that like when you went through that experience, it was awful, but he had all the power. And so what can you do now to actually win, right? It's a reclaiming of your power. It's a
Mhm.
redeeming of that story, right? It's not to say that like what happened was okay. It's the very core idea of redemption, is
Mhm.
like that transformation. And I think
Mhm.
that's a really beautiful thing, to be able to, for you to reclaim that power, to have ownership over your life again, and to take what happened and to transform it into something good using tools that you've built. That's a really amazing thing. And that's the kind of the core message, I think, that we want to be able to give to people, is like, it doesn't matter what that thing is. Although it's easy for somebody who hasn't experienced something as bad as whatever you might be going through listening right now, I think it can be easier to say this, but whatever that thing is, there is a way to redeem that and to turn that into something that, it doesn't mean that what happened was good, but it means that you do now have something incredibly beautiful, to give to the world. And
Mhm.
it can be very difficult once you have made it through that journey and you have something to give and you're seeing the impact of that, to say, I would go back.
Mhm. It's similar to forgiveness too. I think people are like, well, I could never forgive him or her for what they did to me.
Yeah.
And it's not, forgiveness is not condoning what happened to you. You're not saying it's
Right.
okay, I forgive you. You're not saying that. Forgiveness is just letting go of you ever wanting vengeance. Like you are going to let it go. And whatever the universe decides to do is going to decide to do. Like you're
Yeah.
just letting go of that bitterness, that resentment, those feelings, you're letting it go. I mean, for the longest time, anyone would bring up my ex's name and I would have a physical response to it.
Yeah.
And at this point, like I'm able to talk and not, my heart doesn't start racing and I don't get all angry and worked up. It's just like, whatever. But
Yeah,
yeah,
that's a great connection to that too, because like you said, forgiveness is not about, it's not about letting the other person off easy or whatever. It's about you making sure that you are no longer under their power,
yeah,
right?
it's like you're breaking that tie. You're just cutting that cord. Like you don't have
Yeah,
power over me anymore.
yeah,
Taking it back. Yeah.
yeah, and it is challenging. I mean, I've also found that depending on where people are in their healing journey, sometimes even with all the nuance in the world, like it doesn't matter. And sometimes the most important thing is to put up your middle fingers and be like, "Fuck all
Yes.
your advice." Like that's sometimes that's the best thing. And so I think it depends on where you're at in your journey, and that's a big thing. Is like, I just want to support the autonomy of each person in
Mhm.
that growth, especially when recovering from religious trauma. Because it's so easy to look for people on podcasts or some other culty community or influencer who's got, it seems to have all the answers, and to kind of go from your old cult into a new one where you're still not
Right.
building the authority, or you're still not building the power and the self-trust and the intuition. You're still relying on somebody else to give that to you, and so the core wound is still not being met, and you're always just going to get wounded by whoever it is that's in the situation. I think this is why a lot of people end up kind of hopping between communities and they're never fully happy, is because you have to learn how to meet your own needs, and whatever community you're in, as my mom used to say, you got to eat the grass and spit out the sticks.
Yes, that's
um
that's such a good point though. Like I see that even with people who have deconstructed, it's almost like they go from one extreme in the church or the cult that they're in, and then they go to a totally opposite extreme. And it's like you do see that you are going from one cult to the other, like to another. It's like
yeah,
I love that you said that. That is such a good point. So
yeah, so the music.
I know. I was like, I want to get into the music because okay, so first of all, you're super talented. I love your music. I definitely see the if you like Coldplay, you're definitely gonna like your music, which I love Coldplay. Who doesn't like Coldplay? And
I've got a new Coldplay cover coming out on the 19th, actually.
amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about each one of the songs that you've released by name and where can people find it.
Sweet.
Also, we're gonna put links in the show notes as well for people to be able to click on those. But if they're too lazy to do that, and they're like, or I'm driving and I can just tell Siri, go to iTunes and click on what, whatever. All right. So what was your very first one that you did when you left? the church
Oh man. So do you mean like my first song about
that you released? Because I mean, you said that you were
just like
working
released
on
in
one for
general?
like 10 years. Like you worked on one for like 10 years. It was like,
Yeah. So I'll try to explain that better. So when I left, I was mainly just doing like covers. And I had like a couple original songs, and they were pretty much all love songs. There's one song that I released soon after I left. It was still in my deconstruction sort of phase where I was processing through stuff. It's called I Can't Say. I wrote that one when I was 19, and that is actually the opening track on the album. And I re-recorded it and had it mixed by an actual like mixing engineer, which made a huge difference in terms of the quality of everything. And that one, was we officially released that one as a single. I think that was like four years ago, something like that. I was gonna release the whole album like 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, but and I was doing singles like once a month with this
hmm.
sci-fi series that accompanies it, and it was a lot of fun. I got into a lot of debt making the videos because it was at least $1,500, if not sometimes $3,000 per video. And even though I was, directing everything, scripting, obviously doing the acting, still had to hire people and pay for everything. But I would do all
Hmm.
the editing, color correcting, visual effects, all that stuff. But I had an incredible team, and sometimes it'd take at least a day, sometimes 2 days to finish. And it just when you're trying to really make sure, I believe in treating people well, and for an indie film, it was really treating people great. I didn't have big bucks like crazy, but it was still, good, and it still
Hmm.
cost me a lot of money. So I ended up having to put a pin in that because of the money. But then I got in an ATV accident that like fractured my hip, gave me a concussion, and so it took me a long time to heal from that. And eventually, once I kind of got better from all that, then I could really start kind of putting everything together, finishing the album and putting it out. And that kind of took about a 5 year process of recording, going through all the delays, and then eventually getting here. But most of these songs are songs from kind of the past decade and a half now, starting when I was about 19, and then kind of songs that I wrote throughout that process. Some of them are new or newer in terms of like maybe when I was like 29. I'm 35 now,
Hmm.
but they kind of really captured that span of my life. And some of them I actually did write or finish pretty much for the album. So they were, around when I was 29 or 30 in terms of when I like really kind of finished them. But all of them had, even the ones that weren't finished, had most of the structure there. There was just like a little bit of something left. Minus Child in the Dark. That's probably like the newest one that I like really kind of wrote out in
Hmm.
full when I was writing the album because I really wanted to have like a strong statement piece for the end. Um, and that's probably, I mean, that's one of my absolute favorite tracks on the entire album. So yeah, I don't know if I fully answered the question well about the timing for the music, but it was mostly kind of covers at the beginning when I first left, a couple of original like love song things, and then eventually jumping into the album, which I kind of really pushed that this last year.
So how many songs are on the album?
There's 11 songs on the
Okay.
album. There were going to be 12 because I did a really I'm so mad about this, but there's this like it's one of my favorite things I've made so far, but it's a mashup of God's Gonna Cut You Down by Johnny
Ooh,
Cash,
yeah.
with River by Bishop Briggs, and
Okay.
Wade in the Water, the spiritual. And man, it's like
Wow.
one of my favorite things I've ever made. The
Is that on
problem,
the album?
so it's done. I just haven't released it
Oh,
because it was going to be the final. It was going to be one of the tracks in the album, but it's technically what's called a derivative work, which is where if you combine other songs together as a mashup, it's really hard to get a license for that. You have to go and talk to
sure.
the people, and
Yeah.
typically you have to pay a fair amount of money to get that license
Yeah.
to do that. And so, and maybe I could just go and do that. I guess I didn't really know how to do that at the time. And I also figured it'd be way more money than I would be expecting and have in my budget to pay. But it's actually like, it's probably one of the most banger tracks on the album. And it's not released. So I'm going to do a
Oh,
YouTube release at some point, and
yeah.
eventually I'll like release it as a full thing. And if you don't tell anybody, I'll tell you that it is technically on the first round of physical CDs that I did get for this. It's the bonus track at the end, but it's not on streaming because I didn't want to risk getting my catalog taken down.
Okay, well, how do we get a hold of that CD?
Yeah, so you can buy the CD on my website, and there's like t-shirts and stickers and stuff like that on there. So, and I like pack them all manually, like right here in my house. So, and I try to have a fast like delivery system too, so it ships out within like a couple days.
Oh my gosh, that's amazing. Okay, so Christmas is coming, guys.
That's right.
I think when this airs, it's going to be, I think, the week of Christmas or even the week after. So if you're doing some
Awesome.
last minute shopping, you might as well just go and get the CD because you got to have that. I got to have that track on there. I'm a big Johnny Cash fan, so
Uh,
well, this was super fun. I am so glad that we were able to have this conversation today and finally connect and hear your story. And like I said, I'm going to have the links to your music in the show notes. The links that you shared with me will be in the show notes. And then your website will also be linked so people can go and buy merch. And hopefully the CD isn't sold out by the time I get to buy it. Because I really want that 12 track. So, well, anyways, Luke, did you have any final thoughts for our viewers today and our listeners that maybe they're feeling stuck or trapped in their current situation? They're like, I'm having a lot of similar thoughts as what Luke had, just kind of questioning what my beliefs are, what to do moving forward, but this is all I've ever known.
yeah.
What advice would you give somebody that's listening?
Yeah. I mean, I feel like good advice is so highly tuned to a particular person.
Hmm.
It's like being a therapist. If you're really going to help somebody, like you need to kind of know where are they in their life right now, and get to the forefront of like, if I can understand really kind of all the progress that they've made to this point, what are the real questions that they need to kind of, what would be a good question to move things forward, to get them really thinking to the edge of their where they've come to so far. That's usually what I find is the most helpful, and that's so specific to a person that it's hard to say something that would be more generally applicable. So I guess I would there's two groups of people I guess I would address things to. The first is to people who are in the church and who are still trying to like hold on, and but they've got all these doubts and they're wondering about leaving, and they feel like maybe they are supposed to, and they're not telling their friends and family where they're really at, which is, I don't want to throw any shame on that at all, because it's a really hard journey to go through. And sometimes when you leave it, oftentimes it destroys your whole life. It can destroy your marriage, right? I mean, there's tons of stuff that can happen, in your whole community, and financial revenue, all that kind of stuff. But I guess the things I would say would be, knock and the door will be open to you, and seek and you will find. And if you look for it as for silver, and if you search for it as for hidden treasure, then you will find the knowledge of God. And so I think there's this idea that if you're really seeking after truth, that God's got nothing to worry about, if that's really the truth. And I don't think there's a lot of pain in that journey if you end up having to change your whole life because of the implications of that. But it is worth it on the other side.
Hmm.
And there is a deep beauty, and you can still like feel like you're on that same journey, even if your whole world gets turned upside down and few people understand where you've come to in that. So I think that's what I would say to somebody, that's really struggling right now, is it's okay to step out in faith and to not know what the answer is. And in many ways, I think if you have these genuine questions, it's not honoring to the God that you say you believe in to shove them down. The real honoring thing you can do is to seek truth,
Hmm.
wherever that leads, because that will lead you to the God you say you believe in, if that God is real. And that helped me a lot when I was trying to find my way,
Hmm.
because I didn't know what to do, and I didn't want to go to hell if I believed the wrong thing. And so, those concepts and those verses like really helped me to feel safer in my journey of seeking truth, and letting
Hmm.
my questions be okay, because God was really big enough to handle those if God was real.
Hmm.
To people who have kind of already crossed that ledge and are trying to heal, I think the biggest thing to try to have as like an axiomatic faith claim is to believe that it will get better. It feels impossible that things will really heal. Sometimes the rate of healing is so slow that it feels like, what am I doing? Is this ever going to get better? Am I ever going to find a community of people that really understand me? Am I ever going to feel like I am building a life that I want? Am I going to connect with a deep sense of knowing what that is? Even am I going to feel a sense of I know who I am and what my identity is, and be able to find a true deep sense of joy and happiness with where I've come to. And I think that it really is possible. And in that sense, I think it's a similar message of like, you want to be able to try to have that faith. And it's not faith in a God or a deity or something like that. It's faith that things will get better. Faith is, what is it? What is it we always said? It's like faith is believing in what we hope for and being sure of what we cannot see.
Mm-hmm.
It's almost like this oxymoron, right? And this is actually the one where, for me, it's helpful for me to sometimes bring some of those verses, because, and it might not be for everybody, right? So I'm not saying that this is what everybody should do, because for some people it can feel way too difficult. But for me, it's been really helpful because that allows me to take something from my old world and now reclaim power over it as something that I truly believe in, now, but it's not connected for me to a God or a deity anymore. So, and then from there, it's about getting tools that help you to do that. So that's reconnecting with your body in a visceral way. I think, exercise is huge for that. Yoga is huge for that. Meditation, nervous system regulation is huge. Really breathing deeply to be able to calm your nervous system, learning how to observe yourself well, so you can see when your nervous system is flaring up, and in that moment when all the blood is flooding out of your prefrontal cortex and making it hard for you to act rationally and going into the rest of your body, and you're spooling up all this cortisol and adrenaline to go into fight or flight mode, and it happens in an instantaneous moment, and now you're like freaking out and you're just trying to protect yourself. Being able to find your way out of that, to be able to tell yourself that you truly are safe in that moment, is really, really important. And that's being able to observe and be in it and like let yourself experience that is huge. And then having resources like therapy or some friends that you can really be honest with. Therapy is sometimes the most helpful because, in a lot of ways, I'm not saying that friends should be therapists, but I do think that there are massive parallels between a therapist and a really good friend. If your competency as a friend allows you to fully see the other person, help them feel seen so they believe you, that you do understand them, and then competently ask good questions that, and return the autonomy to them, genuine questions of like, well, now they understand this is where you're at. What do you think about this? Or how do you see this? And then let them be the dictator of that answer. They decide what the answer is in that moment. Um, those are some tools that I found to be really helpful. And also, finding some form of art and reconnecting with what are the things that you like to do, that you enjoy, that are simpler. I think getting off of social media or restricting your time in there is huge. And just reconnecting with your body, I mean, through singing is a great way. That actually apparently directly stimulates your vagus nerve as well. And that can help to, a lot with your nervous system regulation. So yeah, those are the things I would say. And it does get better. It really does. And there's a lot of other people out there, that share that experience. And so you're not alone, and there's more communities forming for that, to be able to provide support. And in a lot of ways, I feel like it's helpful just to be around other people who share that experience, and to do other things, sometimes not even to talk about all the intense craziness. Like it's great. And I'm doing it here. I think it's really important, but also to like normalize doing other things with your life and not centering your whole life around the religious aspect and everything. I think that can be really helpful to find and reconnect with a sense of like, well, what does a normal life, look like?
Yes.
That's helpful.
Yes, very much so. Oh, I love it. Thank you so much for being here today, Luke. We really appreciate it. And for everyone listening, please go and follow Luke on social media. He's got a lot of his music up there. And again, we'll put all the links in the show notes. Thanks everyone for listening today. See you next time.
Thanks for having me, Jenny.
I'm really grateful for this conversation and for the vulnerability it took for Luke to share his story. Deconstruction can feel isolating, confusing, and even shame-filled, but hearing experiences like Luke's remind us that we're not broken for asking questions, and we're not alone in the process. If you're currently deconstructing, or if you've ever walked away from the church and you're still sorting through what you believe or don't believe, I hope this episode offered you some comfort and validation. Healing doesn't always come in ways we expect, and sometimes it shows up through creativity, honesty, and telling truth about our own stories. If this episode resonated with you, I encourage you to share it with someone who might need it. And as always, thank you for being here and for holding space for these kinds of conversations. Until next time, take care of yourself and trust that your story still matters. Thank you for listening. Before we close out, I just want to share a quick reminder. The stories told on this podcast are personal experiences and perspectives. They're shared to create awareness and connection, not as medical, legal, or mental health advice. Some of the conversations here focus on abuse, trauma, and other heavy topics, so please take care of yourself while listening. It's always okay to pause, skip an episode, or step away if you need to. And if anything we talked about brings something up to you, we encourage you to reach out to a trusted professional or a support resource. You don't have to carry any of this alone. Thank you for listening.